Hi and welcome again to Sealed for Good, episode number 5. Thanks for joining us. And today we are going to talk about what is one of the biggest things that happen in our industry, such a small little hole that can create massive problems, and I'm sure many of the viewers have seen that before and still challenged with what goes on out there day to day, particularly the waterproofers, tilers in the industry, but they also headaches for builders and designers at times. So I'm going to talk about where we're at now with drains, particularly for wet areas, and these are typical for internal and external wet areas where you'd be tiling. So I'm going to go back a little bit and in time, and this will be like almost showing the evolution of man, and we'll call this baby the ape. So back in the day, and I'm showing my age now, but back in the day when I started in this industry, there were no standards for us to follow with showers and wet areas in terms of how we sealed around pipes, because back in those days just getting someone to waterproof a shower was a big challenge. So when waterproofing membranes sort of started to come into the market, late 80s, in the 90s for wet areas, what would happen typically would be you'd have a pipe that would come through the floor like so. The waterproofer would come in. If it was a liquid system, they'd obviously brush around and seal the best they could coming up the pipe. If it was a sheet, same sort of thing, and have a collar around there. And then what would happen is the floors would be waterproof, would work really well. But the problem was after that we found that we would have this saturation issue where you'd have literally ponding water between the tile bed and the base that was waterproofed. And what was found out over time was that if a membrane was doing its job, the water would just sort of collect around the pipe itself. And so there was a lot of creative ways where people would come in to try and overcome that. Many a time we'd actually find one of the issues where we'd seal around that and someone would come along and smash the pipe, break the seal, and then you're back to square one. But that was also one of the issues. There was no rupture proofing of the membrane. However, so what would happen is that was a problem. Some of the next level thinking was, okay, let's go to cutting the pipe down flush with the floor, and then we would dress the membrane into the pipe, and we'd either paint inside there with a liquid, maybe a bit of silicone if you're lucky around this piece, or a sheet would come down. And the issue there was that, and we'd never had aluminium grates in those days, but what would happen is you'd have a build-up of the membrane inside the pipe. And so the next piece was you'd have this issue where membranes would be damaged just from the floor grate being put in place. And a couple of smart guys I actually saw back in the 90s that were thinking ahead of the time before puddle flanges were developed actually had the idea of drilling holes in the floor grate, in the riser, to try and actually act like that drain that could actually allow excess water around there. And I think that was really the start of where the puddle flange was developed. So we went from the pipe to cutting it flush on the floor, which was still a problem, to then the puddle flange coming out, I recall probably around 93, 94. And it's a great concept. And so I'm just going to show what one looks like so. But the puddle flange was designed to allow, or they really are called leak control flanges. And the concept behind it was that unlike a situation you had here where any water that was, if the grate was in there and water couldn't get through the top piece and avoiding the build-up of water around here, these would allow the grate to sit in those little teeth like so, and any water that was building up along the floor would be able to drain through. And because you can see there's little apertures and holes through there, and the teeth of the puddle flange or leak control flange holds that grate and would sit in like that. So it was a major advancement in the industry, and worked a treat has worked a treat and still the way to go. Now, did it solve all our problems? Unfortunately not. These flanges work based on them collecting the water on the base of the floor, okay, which has been waterproof, whether it's a balcony or a shower alcove. Problem is how they're fixed. And I'm sure waterproofers that are watching this right now are probably laughing, because this is often what they get challenged with if they're not fixing it. They come to site and a flange is actually fixed. You can see that lip, like so, is actually fixed to the floor, and it's sitting proud of the floor, it's above. And so that issue is, you can see there's like a 2 or 3 mil lip around there. So what would happen is the membrane would go on, but you're going to have this lip no matter what membrane you're using, a sheet or a liquid, and the water would just sit around there. And so we would then have this issue again where water's not draining down as it's designed. The correct way of doing it is, as you can see here, this flange is flush or slightly rebated, so you don't get any lip happening. And the floor now, any water that's, once it's waterproofed, any water that sits around that area can't actually build up around so. And so the key piece is waterproofing, which I'll go into in a moment, and how the Gripset method is of doing it. But the main feature of fixing the flange like this, or the puddle flange like this, is that it is ensuring that there's no build-up, you eliminate any excess water, lips, and also it prevents any build-up of other sealants, etc. around the perimeter, because they also create issues. And so it's just a nice finish for the tiler. The waterproof keeps the job nice and neat. Floor grate goes in with the tiler's height, and then what you'd happen from there is tiles and happy days. Now, there is also now what we're seeing out in the industry, and I'm sure many of you are doing this, we see a lot of architects and designers requesting this, is that they're waterproofing both above or below the screed. So some waterproofers will only go one way, under or over. If it's over the screed, then the puddle flange would have to sit in the screed itself and have to be rebated within the screed to have the same effect. But if you're going over and under, the flange must still be used at the bottom section, properly like this, because the whole idea of an over and under system is that in the event there's a failure from the top system, water will still be able to be waterproof, the substrate's still waterproofed and water can still drain down the puddle flange. In that situation there, you'd use something like a riser pipe that would allow, would sit in there, that would come up through the screed, and then the top puddle flange would be fixed again like so, with the right fit in that screed. And so that is a real important piece of how flanges must be prepared. And these are the sort of simple finishes that a waterproofer can do a great job, get the right thickness, put his membrane, whether it be a liquid or sheet, all over the area and get it right. And yet these little details, like wall floor junctions, are the critical factors that start to fail and create issues. And it can all come unstuck here. And more often than not, if a tile is faced with an area that's been waterproofed and it's not letting him tile properly, particularly with small format tiles, is going to create an issue. And the temptation's there to play around with the membrane, and then you get a rupture or a tear, and there's leaks. I'll just quickly go through the Gripset method on how we do it. So if we are waterproofing the floor as such, flange is rebated into the floor, perfect, we're happy with that. We have what we call our butyl square, which is butyl rubber, we don't use bitumen. And the advantage of butyl is that it bonds directly to the plastic, no priming is required. This surface out here, unless it's really dusty, we put our Gripset GP primer or our Gripset OP, but more often than not, if it's a sealed surface or it's a Skyon or some sort of timber, it would be, wood area timber, we'd be able to put the butyl square directly over it. So I get it positioned like so. And the beauty of this is that that half goes in. This half goes in, and you can see that there's no lip around the flange itself. And I'll use one of these. I've cut around those teeth. Like so. And basically, a few little nips. What this is allowing me to do is to make sure that the membrane is terminated, and termination points are so critical when you're laying membranes, into that plastic flange. And I'll lift this up so you can get a better look at that. So you can see that is now all sealed. That joint around the perimeter is also critical, particularly upper story. More often than not, you'll see a large gap there. You put silicons, you put sealants there, they're not compatible with membranes. This method, it bridges that joint between the flange and the floor, and so that is already waterproof. This is done, I come along, I use my Gripset 38FC, all over, roll it out, puddle flanges sorted, waterproofed, guaranteed job, and one of those critical areas is sorted. Tiler's happy, waterproof is happy, builder's happy, client's happy, job done. And so this is the area that the attention to detail is always the piece where people come unstuck in this industry. So please pay attention to this. I know a lot of you guys have done it, you're doing it daily, but this is the way we improve it, by ensuring that everybody's doing it the right way. Take note of this. Any questions or other ways you're doing things, please let us know. We'd love to see your photos or hear stories or other comments about it. Thanks for joining us in this session. We'll see you next time.